Call to order the July 20th, 2017 meeting of the Radnor Township Zoning Hearing Board. We start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is appeal number 2904. The applicant, Anthony and Gloria Mari, property located at 203 Church Street, request an extension of the time for obtaining a permit under section 280-144 of the zoning code for an additional 6 months to February 24, 2018.
Thank you. Nick Keneally, representing the applicant on this matter. You may recall the board did grant a previous extension on this matter. Unfortunately, now it is you cannot get EDUs for sewer modules in Radnor Township because Springfield has put a moratorium on it. So the township will not review the building or grading permit application until that moratorium is lifted. So even though we only need one EDU here because it's one residence, the township has advised us that there's no reason to review the application because they can't approve the application if it doesn't have source. So that's why we're asking for an extension. Hopefully, within 6 months, the moratorium will be resolved and Mr. Maury can get his EDU and make his application for a grading and building permit.
Any of the board members have any questions of council or the applicant? Seeing none, does anyone want to make a motion?
Actually, I have a question for the solicitor. Also, I think the mics are turned up a little high, so we're getting a little feedback here.
Does anybody know on the board how to manually adjust these?
John, is there a limitation on the number of extensions we can grant an applicant?
There's no limitation on the number. The extensions have to be at 180 days a pop, so we can't give a longer extension. I think that the action of the sewer authority in denying in putting a moratorium is a very real reason to grant them the extension at this time, and to if it's still in effect, I think that's an issue for another day.
Thanks, John. Mr. Chairman, I'd move that the applicant be granted the extension that they are requesting.
Is a second to a motion?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Continuing to make a record here, the second substantive matter listed on the circulated agenda is appeal number 2985.
Excuse me.
The applicant, Villanova University, property located at Villanova West Campus at Spring Mill and County Line Roads and zoned PI, appeals the determination of the zoning officer dated March 9, 2017, or in the alternative requests a variance from section 280-69 regarding height of the structure or such other relief as may be required from section 280-69C or section 280-70 of the zoning code to install an air-supported temporary seasonal dome on its west campus. In the files here, we have a letter from council to the university dated July 17th, 2017, indicating the university is withdrawing this appeal, expressing an intent to refile for purposes of being heard on the September agenda, asking the board to confirm that this withdrawal is without prejudice, which it is. So if I see that council has nothing to add on that point, so this item is withdrawn. Those who may have an interest in it, who are either in the room or watching on TV, should watch their mailboxes and the board's website for any notice regarding a potential September hearing on the same substantive matter.
And Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, Villanova will have to send out new notices, and in addition, they will notify the neighbors by email, which is how they communicated this withdrawal as well.
Thank you very much. Okay. Proceeding on, Appeal 2989. The applicants Kent and Julie Macy, property located at 805 South Ithan Avenue and zoned R1, seeks relief from Section 280-76A 1 through 6 of the zoning code in regard to intrusion into the floodplain for the construction of a deck and spa. Please introduce yourself for the record and be sworn in, and then we have a procedural item that we have to discuss.
Sorry, if you'll raise your right hand, I'll swear you in. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your name for the record, please.
Kent Massey.
Thank you. And use the microphone.
Oh, can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah, yes.
Mr. Massey, before we proceed, I have a question. In reviewing the file, it's my understanding that the request is for relief relating to a structure located on the floodplain, right?
Partially. Yeah.
Yes, partially. Did you have an opportunity at any point to have any dialogue with the township engineer on this point? Provide him any information in connection with this hearing?
Prior to, no. Afterwards, I had asked about the documentation of the floodplain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is the circumstance that we need to discuss is that there is a provision of our township zoning code 280-81B. And if any of the members are following along, you might want to consider joining us, which specifies procedures that the board is to require in connection with issuance of variances relating to items of this type. And it indicates that materials need to be provided to the township engineer. There's a requirement to deliver plans. There's some cross-sections, profiles of slopes. There's pretty detailed requirements.
I did some of it through the grading permit I sent in, but
Okay.
is that not sufficient, or?
Well, that's sort of what we're going to need to discuss before we get into the substance of your matter. And I think the issue, and to the extent board members want to share their perspective, I'm open to hear about it, and also the solicitor may have a perspective. The question becomes whether we conclude the board has the discretion to proceed with this matter, given that you did not provide these required materials to the engineer.
I thought I did through the grading permit, and it had plans and cross-sections in there. Was that not adequate, or?
Well, they have to be to the satisfaction of the township engineer, which means there has to, have been, some sort of discussion with the township engineer.
Township engineer didn't tell me that it was inadequate.
Well, I mean, there may be, I don't know if there is a problem with, the staff communication or what, but we're sort of, we are constrained by 280-81 capital B, and it says that prior to the hearing, we have to furnish the material to the township engineer, as, shall be deemed necessary. And you can do that too. And I don't think this has been done.
Well, I mean,
And don't misunderstand, we're not suggesting that it's necessarily your fault that that wasn't done, because the way the particular provision in question is drawn, there is the expectation that upon the receipt of your application, someone from the staff would communicate the need for you to provide the township engineer with the enumerated items that are in the section that we're talking about. So the fact that we're bringing this up is largely procedural. It's not intending to say that you were doing something improper. It's simply, I think, a problem of communication.
just to understand, is submitting a grading permit considered giving it to the township engineer, or is those two separate?
No, they're separate things. The grading permit actually is what triggered, as you know better than we do, the grading permit is what triggered ultimately triggered the fact that you're before us this evening.
Okay.
So I don't believe that simply a grading permit application covers the requirements of this particular section of the zoning code.
Because, I mean, in the grading permit application, there's a plan and cross-section. I certainly, no one had told me I needed to.
And we're sympathetic to that, but we are still, as the solicitor has pointed out, we're still constrained by the requirements of the zoning code as to whether we can appropriately move forward with this application at
John,
this time.
so I'm reading this, it looks to me like this is something discretionary to be decided by the township
Yeah,
engineer.
but it's got to be decided by the township engineer.
And if he did not say anything to the applicant, what does that mean?
Well, no,
Is that deemed consent?
George, we don't know that the staff went to the township engineer to even flag the issue.
Well-
I don't think we've seen anything that
So
would suggest that.
what are we missing that we couldn't make the decision
Well,
tonight?
could we do
Steve
this subject to the approval of the township engineer, that we approve this tonight and then get that in the next step rather than have him, because he's already done a lot of the work, and it just seems like we're not meeting till September. He's completed a lot of the construction, and it's the township's fault, so can we not just approve it, if we decide to approve it, of course, subject to the township engineer?
I appreciate the suggestion, but the theory would be that the township engineer's perspective should inform our analysis. So it would be somewhat artificial to go through a process and approve.
I did email back and forth to the township engineer about, understanding the flood plan and so on. I tried to call him. I never was able to get him on the phone.
Yeah,
But
I'm not suggesting that that you did anything wrong or didn't follow up. As you may know, the head of community development, who normally coordinates this, is on military
Did not.
leave, and so he's not here, which is something where we just have, that's the reality, we have to deal with that. I mean, my recommendation is that we should, we need the township engineer to sit down and see what you have so far. Is it sufficient? And if not, give you an opportunity to do it, and then come back, and then we give an approval that doesn't violate our own ordinance.
And
If we give them, assuming we give an approval, we
Right.
legally do it that is, one that is not violative of our procedures.
it's fine by me. I mean, I don't have to pay any additional fees, do I?
I would recommend.
No, we will recommend to staff that any fees associated with, formally, what you're going to do is request a continuance. And we're going to grant the continuance. And then it's going to be put on the agenda for September. And we will recommend, and I would expect the recommendation will be accepted to the staff, that they waive any potential fees associated with the rescheduling, given that the circumstances are what they are.
Technically, the staff has to decide that, but they've always followed our recommendations, and especially in this case, I think they'll follow the recommendations.
And again, there's no requirements that people be represented by counsel in connection with these items, but again, you can consider whether,
I was paying enough for all this anyway.
well, you can consider whether that's in your interest or not, and whether that might either have been helpful or be helpful in the future. So given that circumstance, I think where we are is we're inviting you to ask this be continued to our next meeting.
Oh, certainly, then I would appreciate it continuing.
And would you, you also will, we have a period from, the date of the filing to issue a decision. When we grant a continuance, we ask that you extend the running of that period to the September hearing rather than having it run from July, because then we have a problem that we have to give you a decision before the continued hearing. So do you give, a grant that the hearing in September will suffice for the municipality's planning code, and our decision will be followed within 45 days of the decision of the matter?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you very much. This item is continued till the September agenda. I apologize on behalf of the township for the inconvenience to you.
Mr.
now,
Chairman, I don't think he has, I'm sorry.
The September would be like around the 20th?
It's the third Thursday of the month.
Yeah, I've got a big experiment we're running with the Army down at Fort Benning. I may, well, I guess
Well,
I'll
one
have to hire
option-
counsel then, right?
One option, if I see Julie on the
Yes,
application, if
right.
Julie and council came, they could carry
She's
the
out of
ball.
town on business right now, but yeah, okay.
And then, the
Yeah.
other option, I mean, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Okay.
My
John?
son just completed Fort Benning for school for boys and, school for boys and girls.
That's a rough
But,
program, especially in the summer.
Yeah, and he did it in the summer. You don't have to, I just wanted to observe that this was duly advertised, and, we had our public meeting on it, so I don't see any need for this to be advertised again.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you. So
Thank
I
you.
don't have to do the mailing again?
No, that's,
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate
that's
that.
not
Thank
Okay.
you.
Was there anyone else in the audience here on this particular item? Okay, thank you, sir. Next is Appeal 2990. The applicants, Roy Binion and Tina Binion, property located at 531 Sproul Road and zoned AC, seek relief from Section 280-10B.4 and 280-10B-3 regarding side yard and front yard setbacks to construct an addition to the rear of an existing non-conforming structure. The applicant expressed some informal concerns prior to us going into session. So please introduce yourself, be sworn in, and then again share what you mentioned previously.
You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your full name for the record.
Roy Binion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So I had a conversation with a professional engineer, and I was told that it might be possible that I am here for no reason at all. And that's possibly because I did not follow up on any conversations with Kevin Kachansky asking for an official determination, asking him to determine whether or not my proposed addition does not increase the existing nonconformity, in which case I would be here, as I said, for no reason. And so I apologize for, holding up anybody's time
Now,
here.
so you're indicating that you essentially jumped straight to did you make application for permitting to the township?
I decided to get a site plan follow through with approval from your body before I sunk further monies into an architectural, rendering and drawing set and further application fees for something that I would not be allowed to build.
It's unorthodox, but I think I understand what you did. Huh?
I don't think it's ripened, but
I guess one of our many lawyers on the board makes a good point. Let me describe a little bit, and the board members might want to jump in. But because, as we have seen the plans, you're not extending the property closer to the side yard.
Correct.
It is a interpretation of the relevant section. I won't characterize the interpretation, that as such, you should not need any specific relief. You should not need a variance, nor should you need a special exception. If the Township Planning Department agrees with that, they would issue your permit, and then you would proceed in accordance with the development process. If they were to disagree, then you would file the appeal and come back here and argue the matter, yourself or through or with counsel perhaps. But since our job really is to assess determinations that are made preliminarily by the Township administrative staff, we really can't provide an advisory opinion and say, in any formal fashion, it's our opinion that this should be granted. It's just beyond the legal authority of a zoning hearing board in Pennsylvania. So,
Okay. I mean, I have to, we have jurisdiction to entertain the special exception and a variance, and they've been applied for, and we can say they're not necessary. I think we do have jurisdiction at this stage of the game.
John, where's the special exception request in this application?
Let's see. Seeks any relief from the sections, okay? So he's asked for relief, and first, if this is truly an advisory opinion and the board thinks that, you're right, we're done, okay? But he's asked for any relief off of the sections, the yard sections, and if he's not extending the nonconformity. Now, one of the things that hasn't been established is whether there is a nonconformity. That is the applicant's job, and we ought to put some stuff on the record if we have, before we jump to, the first thing is whether you want to hear the case at all. And the two things that, and secondly, I think it can be heard, but they also have to establish the nonconformity.
well, I mean, I do understand the applicant came here based on the assumption that he was heading in a different direction. So I don't see a lot of files or others.
I can comment on the existing nonconformity as best I understand. Mr.
All right,
Ryan?
well, hold on,
sorry.
because we'll get to that if we decide to hear the case. I welcome input or opinions from any of the board members.
Well, I mean, I just looked at the MPC, and I mean, I guess I'd agree with John. We can, and 909 says we have the authority to review applications for variance and special exceptions without a determination. So if you'd like, my opinion is, if you'd like to proceed, we will listen. To me, I would probably go through the township first.
You're the guy who told me it wasn't right for me.
Well, I read the MPC again.
All right, so,
He's asked for relief, but I think relief picks up, any special exception or
I'm asking for nothing other from any of you here than that I'm not going to be wasting my time or monies towards this addition which I propose. And the only reason I'm here is because every single piece of that, every single structure on that parcel is existing non-conforming. None of them, all of them are inside of the setbacks requirements, and only...
Before you start your argument, you got to make a decision. You need to make a decision right now, which is you can withdraw and go meet with the people of the township and try to sell them and get the permit, and if you hit a roadblock there, have an appeal right to us. Or you can ask us to hear the case right now. We're not making any promises. We're telling you we'll hear the case, and you can get a decision that way.
I think there's a
And let me
third
also
alternative.
say, just because, if we happen to grant something here, and we don't say, by the way, you're not, increasing a nonconformity, you have to do it per this plan.
Sorry?
You would have to do it per the plan.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, usually you meet with the architect, you figure out what you want to do, you submit the permit. So you can come to us and say, this is what I'm building. This is exactly what I'm building, because if for some reason you meet with the architect, you change, it won't be valid anymore.
Yeah, you only get approved, precisely what you apply for. So couldn't
John,
we
you were
also-
giving a third option.
Yeah, continue the case and give him 2 months to, that way if he does have to come back, he, doesn't have to pay the initial application fee. This is one that, Kevin Kachansky, he can't be available on, immediately because of his military obligation, but he can be, he does check in. He's stationed, I think, in Willow Grove or something like that.
Yep.
And he checks in with the staff, and that there is enough time, I would hope, between now and the September hearing to try to resolve this with Kevin.
Mr. Ryan, I would gratefully accept option C.
You say the option is proceed.
No.
Oh, option
C.
C. Okay, fine. So you're seeking a continuance. We will grant the continuance. John, go through your technicalities on the.
Yeah, we have to ask you to extend the time for us to commence hearings until September, and extend the period to render a decision to 45 days after the conclusion of the hearings. I assume it'll be the date of the hearing. Will you agree to that?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, good luck with these efforts, and we may or may not see you in September.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Appeal 2991, the applicants John and Ann Brennan, property located at 856 Lewis Lane and zoned R4, seek relief to enclose the existing deck on the rear of their home, which will not be extended any closer to the rear yard setback than the existing deck. Applicant seeks a variance from section 280-30E of the zoning code in relation to the rear yard setback, a special exception under section 280-101B of the code, or contends that the use is permitted by right. Applicant further seeks any other zoning relief required by this application and the exhibits attached here too. Nick?
That was a mistake. Fortunately, it's open. I thought it was I should have known better. Norma? Ms. Norma?
Will you both be testifying?
Yes.
You can both raise your right hands. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your names for the record, please.
John Brennan,
I'm sorry? Okay, you have to speak louder than that.
Okay, John, are you the owner of the premises with your wife?
856 Lewis Lane, I am.
Okay, and we, A1, or actually A2, I've marked as the deed for the property. That is the deed that you purchased the property.
That's correct.
And you purchased just recently, April of 2017?
April 2017.
And where did you live prior to that?
Where was it?
Well, most recently.
116 Montrose Avenue.
When did you live over, how about prior to that?
Prior to that, we were on Stone Creek Lane, 1 Stone Creek Lane in Radnor.
All right. Did you, any special reason why you're moving to this area?
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Garrett Hill area on Fitzwilliams Lane, owned a home on Rockingham Road. My first, actually, apartment was above
Sir,
Horace
can
P.
you
J.
put the mic up
I certainly can.
and repeat yourself? I'm having trouble hearing.
Yeah, it's John Brennan.
I know.
Yeah, so my first home, actually, I lived in, was in Garrett Hill, which I grew up on Fitzwilliams Lane. After I was married, I lived above Horace P. Jerky Saloon. I bought a home in Bailey Road in Rosemont, then to Rockingham Road in Rosemont. I think I've moved 6 times within the township. I've raised 4 children that attended Radnor schools, and now all of my children live within the Radnor Township School District. And my hope is that I'll be able to share Thanksgiving and many of the holidays together by expanding the area in my home. So that's really why I'm before you this evening.
And actually, not only are they living in Radnor, they're living within how many blocks of where you're living now?
So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Garrett Hill, but Lewis Lane connects with Williams Road. So my son John and my son Chris live on Williams Road. My daughter Bridget just bought Bill Lorraine's home, which was on Rockingham Road, and my daughter Ashley lives in Hickory Lane. And actually, we had our first grandchildren January and April, so excited about having the opportunity to spend some time with them in the community.
Now, you talked about you living in the community, but I believe your wife's living in the community too, hasn't she?
My wife is a long-standing 59-year member of Radnor Township as well.
And she actually grew up, I don't know if Oak Prairie is considered Garrett Hill, but Yorkshire Road, okay. Now, the house itself, I've marked as A3 plot plan hearing. Is this accurate plot plan description of your property?
That's correct.
And how many square feet do you think the house itself is?
Approximately 1,750 square feet.
Okay, and what's the layout of the home?
It's a split level, Nick. You walk in, there's a living room, dining room, and a very small kitchen area, all connected. You walk up a brief flight of stairs to the second floor. There's 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. And then downstairs, there's a very small recreational room, a laundry room, and a garage that's attached there.
And so what are you proposing, the addition, what would it be for?
Yeah, we'd like to break through the back wall and build a large eat-in kitchen there so that we can serve family meals through the holidays and entertain guests there.
And I'm showing you what we've marked as A3, and this area here where it says open deck. Is that the area we're proposing to put the addition?
That's correct. We
Would it
enclose
extend any more than that deck there?
There's no plan to extend that any further.
And that's a wood deck, correct?
That's correct.
A raised wood deck.
That's correct, put in by the original owner of the property.
Okay, and you're going to actually put in walls and enclose it, roof?
Correct.
And make it part of the building itself?
Correct, sir.
Mr. Cornelia, I can't seem to find my plot plan. Do you have an extra plot plan that I can refer to?
Should I give you this one, or?
Let me just look at it and give it back. I'll just look at it and give it back.
Nick, you're going to demo the deck and put a new foundation in and do
That's
wiring?
correct. That's correct,
Okay,
sir.
so you're not building technically on top of the deck?
No, sir.
You're tearing it down?
Yes, sir.
But John, you're not extending it beyond?
No, sir.
I'm going to show you some
All right, is it going the full length of the house?
It is not the full length of the house currently, and it'll just, whatever that structure is, I think it's 10 or
it's just that
10 by
space.
12, something like that. Correct,
Okay,
sir.
thanks.
It looks
Yes.
like 10 by 18.
There it is, 10 by
10
18.
10 feet 8 inches by 18 0 inches, if I,
There you go. It extends primarily about the length of the dining room and the kitchen area on the back of the home.
Nick, is there a permit filed for the deck?
Yes, there is.
There is?
That's marked as A.
Oh, yes,
A12.
okay. And do you happen to know if there was any determination if it was part of the structure or not part of the structure?
All I know, there was a permit file issue. It just.
I know the township takes the stance that it's not technically part of the structure unless it's in some way attached. Is this in some
Well,
way
it's
attached?
attached, I guess, if it was an accessory structure, of course, it'd have to be 10 feet away and 10 feet from the property line. If it's attached, I believe, at least recently, the township's treated as part of the building.
Right.
Now, I don't know how they treated it back in A5, when this permit was granted, but there was no zoning relief granted for this. This was.
So the permit was denied?
Permit was issued.
No, I'm sorry, this permit. This permit application that you made today was denied?
No, A12 for the deck.
Yes.
Was approved.
No, I'm talking about the
current
today.
The addition to the house that we're
Well,
talking about right now.
We felt we had to come here. Again, I didn't take it to Kevin.
All right.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, okay.
Because we're enclosing, I know, to be honest, I know what Kevin's position is going to be, that since we're enclosing it, you have to go to zoning.
Enclosing it is a tough phrase, because you're technically
You're
not
putting a
enclosing.
roof and
If you're
then-
enclosing it, I would sympathize with
Yeah,
you, but
right.
you're building, yes,
We're
you're building new.
We're building it.
You're building an addition.
We're building addition.
Okay.
Correct. And I know that Kevin would say that we have to come here. So I didn't even bother really.
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with this area because I live on Rockingham. We had one case about 8, 10 years ago. Apparently, these decks, permits for decks were given all, freely, and they may have violated the rear yards, but they just were given out anyway, and that's a reality. I just observed for you that there are also, there's a deed restriction, which I think applies to this home as well, which, we don't say anything about because real property is not our, we have no jurisdiction over title to real property, but, we can't.
John, let's let the applicant proceed with his case.
And just referring to, I'll touch on what John says. A2, which is the deed, refers to an easement 10 feet from the property line, from the real property line, and we're not in that easement area.
I think it's something else, but, in any
Rather, it's
event,
not, at least it's not on the deed.
no, not on the deed, but it's a.
Well, behind it, where the
yeah.
10 feet easement is utility line. That's why.
Yeah, it was not,
property-
it
and
was a
behind this
building.
property is utility.
Again, we just can't, anything that we do doesn't speak to that.
But there is reference to an easement that we're not within on this, and I understand too, you can't really address that. But let's just look at some pictures so the board knows what we're talking about. A4, it's at the front of the home,
That's correct.
and A5, that's
That would be the
looking
left-hand side from the street,
And A6,
would be the right-hand side from the street.
and A7,
That would be from the retaining wall, looking at the back of the property.
and that's the deck that we're referring to.
That's correct, yep.
Now, A8,
That is just a picture of what's behind my property. I think the nearest home behind my property is probably between 50 and 75 yards.
so there's like 150 feet.
There's plenty of room between mine and the next home
Okay,
behind
what
me.
is back there then?
I-
What's behind your property, immediately behind you? We talked about the easement. Do you have some utility lines back there?
There's, I believe, 3 utility lines that hang on the poles that go through the back of the property, but once you go through that, there's nothing but what you see in that
Like a matter of
picture.
fact, A9, I believe, may show those,
That's correct, Nick.
does that show those utility wires? And also shows the back of your property, again, indicating heavy vegetation behind you.
Extremely heavy vegetation, hasn't been maintained in years.
A10
That would be looking to my neighbor's yard
from the deck.
from the deck, yeah.
And A11?
Same picture, similar, looking from the back of the house across the deck out
And-
into my neighbor's yard.
And actually, your neighbor has a similar deck. Looks like almost the same deck.
Yeah, there's a number of decks as you look down the property lines.
And A12, you heard us refer to a building permit application, and this is from the township records.
That's the original permit that Mr. Sulpizio, who was the original owner, who's still alive today.
Mr. Formicella.
Mr. Formicella, I'm sorry, who's still alive today.
And this was issued, it appears, July 17th, 1985.
That's correct, yes.
You had mentioned some sizes of building, of your rooms, and I'm going to show you two, and I haven't made these apart, but A13 and A14, if you can just describe for the board what A13 and A14 represent height.
A13 is a picture of the kitchen that I described earlier, 12 foot 6 inches by 8 foot. And then A14, Nick, describes the area that as soon as you walk in the home into the living room area. I don't have the exact size of that, but maybe 12 by 14 or something like that.
I believe you said the kitchen, what Amy had told me, was 12 and a half by 8 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, and is that the living room?
That's the living room area.
So just to reiterate, your proposal is to build an addition to the rear of your home
Correct.
that is the same size as the existing deck.
That is correct.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Do any members of the board have questions for the applicant at this point? Okay, we will have the opportunity as necessary in a second. Are there any members of the audience who wish to speak to this application? One more time. Is there anybody here who wants to talk about this application? Okay.
I just requesting exhibits to be part of the record, please.
Nick, assuming you're going after a variance here, what would we have for the hardship? Just so we have something in the record?
Well, we have an one, you have a very small home, and there's really no other area to put any type of addition to make it more livable, and we already have an existing deck also, so there's obviously no harm to the neighbors. There's no one here in opposition. The neighbors are in favor of the application. I didn't ask John that, but
Correct.
my understanding is the immediate neighbors did not
That's
have an
correct.
issue with it.
Let me rephrase, as opposed to asking that question. Have you had any either email or direct conversations with each side neighbors about this is what we're doing and we're going in front of the township?
Yes, I actually spoke to the neighbor from my back is to the street, to the left of me, Mr. Murray, and he has no problem with anything that's going on. The neighbor to the right, I haven't had, he's been on vacation, but since I've moved in, been a very pleasant neighbor. That doesn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't have an objection, but I don't think he would, given the size of the deck that he has behind his property.
Thank you. And perhaps to fatten up the hardship argument, is it fair to say, based on your earlier testimony, that you think this addition is necessary for you to fully utilize the house with your extended family in the neighborhood for regular visits and entertaining and whatnot?
That's the main reason we moved back into the neighborhood. One, to be close to the family. Two, to make sure that we can have social gatherings as often as possible with our kids. And it's the primary reason why we've elected to do this. And I'm thrilled to be back that close, not like where I grew up. So,
Any other questions of the witness or the applicant? I'll entertain a motion.
I just have one. I mean, have you looked at other configurations? I mean, we are supposed to grant the minimum release necessary. So, I mean, just want to throw that out there. Did you, because to me, if you get this today, if you're getting this little sliver here,
Yep.
you could obviously do a larger expansion with the same exact hardship. So I just want to make sure that you've kind of thought through, do I want to have it through the entire house, the length of the house, and maybe make it 8 feet, or are you just kind of going, no, I'm good with this right here?
yeah, for the purposes that we're looking for it to serve, we feel pretty confident that this will meet the needs that we'll have in the future. So, thank you for asking, though. But we spend our time during the summer down the shore, and really am excited about being able to spend more time throughout the winter months here. So, thank you.
Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve variance under section 280-30E in compliance with the site plan as Exhibit A3.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Okay, is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? No opposed? Thank you very much. Good luck with your project.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Hey, Nick, can I have that exhibit now, because I can use that for...
The next item on the agenda is Appeal 2992. The applicant, Cornerstone Cheese and Charcuterie LLC, property located at 5 West Avenue and Zone WBOD seeks relief to add an additional 26 seats to its existing restaurant. Applicant contends that the relief is permitted by right and appeals the determination letter of the zoning officer dated May 30, 2017, or in the alternative, request a variance from section 280-53.12, paren B of the zoning code regarding the number of required off-street parking spaces or such other zoning relief necessary to permit the additional number of seats. Now, I know, or am advised only based upon a notation on the agenda which I saw tonight, that suggests this item has been withdrawn.
That is correct. It has been withdrawn. We have reached out to Mr. Kachansky, and we can comply with a certain number of seats, less than what was initially requested in the application, but the applicant is willing to withdraw the application based on the number of seats that they are permitted to have by right.
Okay. Appeal 2992 is withdrawn. Thank you. Appeal 2993, which is the last thing on our agenda. The applicant, Radnor Properties SDC Limited Partnership, property located at 150 Radnor Chester Road and zoned PB, seeks relief to place a generator at the edge of the existing parking lot adjacent to the railroad tracks. The property is PB-planned business except for a 100-foot ring of land which was rezoned to residential from PB-planned business in the 1980s. The generator will be located on the residential strip. Applicant seeks a variance from section 280-14 of the zoning code to construct the generator on the residential strip, a special exception under 280-101A2 of the code to expand a nonconforming use, or contends that the use is permitted by right. Additionally, applicant seeks a variance and/or a de minimis variance from section 280-15 paren F relating to maximum impervious coverage, or contends that the proposal complies with the coverage requirement. Applicant further seeks any other zoning relief required by this application and the exhibits attached.
Thank you. Nicholas Canelli representing the applicant. There's two more exhibits I'd like to hand up that I've marked as A11 and A12. A11 is a cross-section showing height, and A12 is a further aerial photo of the site.
Thank you. Thank you.
Les?
Sir, if you'll raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And state your full name, please,
Lester Santinello,
and spell that.
Santanniello.
And Les, by whom are you employed?
Brandywine Realty Trust,
And what is your office address?
555 East Lancaster Avenue in Radnor.
And what's the address of Brandywine?
555 East Lancaster Avenue in Brandywine, in Radnor.
Okay, is that is corporate headquarters for Brandywine and
That
Radnor?
that is the corporate headquarters, yes.
What is your position at Brandywine?
I'm a senior property manager for the Radnor, Plymouth, and Conshohocken properties.
And what exactly is Brandywine Realty Trust?
Brandywine Realty Trust is a public REIT that manages and owns properties around the Philadelphia and Jersey area.
To show you what has been marked and made part of the file A2, again, establishing ownership of the property.
Yes.
And A3 and A4 or actually A3, is two power of attorneys granted to you and Will Golden, who's also here this evening, by the property owner, giving you permission to act on behalf of the property owner. Is that right?
Yes, they are.
Now, I'm going to show you what's been marked as A4. And this is an overall site plan prepared by Site Engineering Concepts. And Rob Lambert from Site Engineering is here regarding this also. But if you can just describe the site. First, why don't you tell me what buildings does this plan depict?
This plan shows Radnor Financial Center, which consists of 555 East Lancaster Avenue, 130, 150, 170, Radnor Chester Road.
So in particular for this application, we're talking about those three buildings, 130, 150, and 170 Radnor Chester Road?
Yes,
So this application really doesn't pertain to the 555 building?
not at all, no.
Okay, 555 okay. Now, describing the site itself, just to give the board a feel for where everything is, can you show them Lancaster Avenue is on the western side of the site?
Yes, it is, right here.
Eh.
And Radnor Chester Road runs along the front of the property.
Okay, and on the northern side of the property, what is located there?
Behind the property, we have the Conrail and SEPTA railroad tracks.
And we're showing the generator being located on that northern side of the property?
Yes, directly behind the 150 building, just off of the parking area in the grassy berm.
This generator, what buildings will it serve?
It'll serve the 130, 150, and 170 buildings.
Why do you require a generator for those buildings? Currently, is there a generator servicing these buildings?
There are two smaller generators that tenants have put in for backup power to their servers and some of their DMARC rooms, but we need to put in a whole building generator because of the fact that over the last 5 years, since 2014, we've lost power at this location 19 times, and we've lost a total of 41 hours of productive activity for the tenants in the building. The building consists of 31 different operations, different tenants, different owners, companies, and there's 1,600 people that work here. So when we lose power, they're out of work. They just sit on their hands because they can't work.
Is there a main tenant in these buildings?
Lincoln
Besides Ray
Financial Group is our main tenant in here, and this is their corporate headquarters. This is where they've moved from downtown Philly out here. This is where they want to be.
And Lincoln Financial, what type of activity, or let me ask you this, instead of what type of activities shut down when power is lost?
Well, you have, technically the building is dark except for our emergency power. So you have, Lincoln Financial Group does pension planning, they do trading and investing. They also do, they work on the stock market, and they're involved in a lot of different operations. But we also have another company called Click in there, who is a software group, so their people can't work. Global Tax Management is a large tenant. Lincoln Financial has the entire 130 building, and that's where all their trading and their pension and their insurance areas are located. So when this power goes off to these buildings, this building, which houses about 300 people, is dead in the water.
How many square feet are we talking about will be serviced by this generator?
We're talking about 480,000 feet here total.
Is that net or gross?
That's net.
Net rentable space.
Rentable space, yes.
You had mentioned, I believe, 19 times it had gone off in the last...
19 times, yes.
Well, do you know the amount of time that it's been down for?
Sometimes it's down for a minute and a half. Other times it's down for an hour. The longest duration was 13 hours.
And so it's not going down necessarily, it's going down more than just when we have a big storm or a hurricane.
Correct.
Do you know why or anything? Or?
Well, the power lines for this property run along the Amtrak lines, and I know PECO is working on trying to find solutions to that. But whenever there is a heavy thunderstorm or a high winds, we inevitably lose power for a short period of time because you have tree branches that come down and knock out a phase, and it knocks our building out of service.
Now I'm going to show you what's been marked as A5. And is this showing the location of the generator?
Yes, it is.
And it shows it in where,
It's, go ahead. The location is in the grassy berm, and it's directly behind the 150 building.
okay, and let's just look at some photographs here. And the first one I've been marked is A6. Unfortunately, these are in black and white. The board I know has color ones. Can you just describe what we're seeing there in A6?
Well, this looks like an aerial view from the west side of the building, which shows the 130 building, which is the little one in front. Then you have the 150 building, and then you have the 170 building, which is behind it. It shows the parking areas, part of the 555 Lancaster building, and the entrance coming in off of Lancaster Avenue. Behind the building,
To the left of that photo?
to the left, it shows the railroad tracks, and it shows the berm and the buffer between the railroad tracks and our property.
A7?
This is another shot of the railroad tracks, the buffer, and our rear parking lot and the area where we would like to set that generator.
And also, does it show a heavy buffer to the left of railroad tracks?
It does. There's a nice wooded area here on the left of the railroad tracks.
Showing A8 where those cones are, is that the approximate location of the generator?
Yes, it is.
And finally, A9, is that a, go ahead.
This shot is the back entrance to the building. It shows where you can come out of the building, and this is the location. This is a shot from where the generator will be sitting back in towards the building.
I'm sorry, excuse me, A8, can we go back to A8 for a second? The cones don't represent the entire length of the generator, right? It's just roughly where it's going, or is it that big? mean,
I
that's-
believe that's the length of the, well, that's the area that it's going to be. It's also going to include a retaining wall, so
Okay.
it's going to be a bigger area
Okay.
than what we need
All
for
right,
the
thank you.
generator.
And actually, the engineer, just so the board knows, the witnesses we have lined up here today are the engineer, the manufacturer of the generator, and then a noise person talking about DBAs and things of that nature. So there's some questions you may want to hold for those witnesses as opposed to less. Showing you A12, and if you can, what does that represent?
This is an aerial shot of the Radnor financial area. It shows 555 Lancaster, the 130, the 150, and the 170 building. The parking area is in front. It also shows the 200 Radnor Chester Road property, some of the Radnor Hotel, and the 240 Radnor.
And in
Chester Road.
particular, on the opposite side of the railroad tracks, opposite the generator, that's Glenmary, I believe, road,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
And then Cambria Court would be further down to the left across from the 555 building.
Cambria is over here to the far left-hand side.
And as I mentioned, we're going to have other witnesses, but have steps been taken about noise from the generator?
Yes, we knew because of the size of the generator that we needed to back up this building, that we wanted to make sure that sound was not going to be a problem to the area residents. So we have purchased the highest quality generator cover that we could possibly buy without it being, it's hospital grade, it's what they call it.
That's all I have for Les.
And this question, either you can answer here or with a future witness. What was the basis for establishing this particular location for the generator?
Our main switchgear to the building is right here in the back part, and it is the closest location for us to bring in the service from the generator into the building so we can power everything up. we-
The engineer can testify to the physical reasons, actually. There's physical reasons as well, and prior nonconformities that we'll get into with the engineer.
What is your current circumstance in terms of parking capacity as against code?
Yeah, we're nonconforming as to parking. That's one of the reasons why it was moved there.
Could you give us your perspective on parking at the location in terms of frequently filled, not frequently filled?
If we could go back to one of the overhead pictures. If you look at this picture here, you can see.
That's which
A6.
exhibit?
A6.
Thank you.
And A7.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, describe it.
Well, this is the parking area for the Radnor Financial area. And you can see the density in the parking by 555 and 130 and 150. But if you look over behind the 170 building, nobody parks over there. So we have enough parking. We just have to make sure that people start utilizing all the parking spaces.
Thank you.
Nick, just so going back to A4, the R1 to PB, I just want to make
Right.
sure it's the dotted line?
Yeah, and
Okay.
Rob Lambert will testify to that, but
I just want to make sure I understand.
I
the
can
line.
show,
And so
I
you,
can show you that Rob will testify to it.
I mean,
This
there are two
whole-
things. Is the impervious, because I didn't see an existing for R1, because that,
So, back here, as you'll see, this line here is an R1 line. It's about 100 feet wide. It goes around the entire property, at least the edges of the property in this direction. This R1 district actually extends across the street to where Giant, I guess, is now, and those stores over there, and extends to the apartments on Ivan Avenue. Unfortunately, I recall this occurring, it was around the mid-1980s. The Board of Commissioners determined that they wanted to put this R1 strip around the business area, and that's why it appeared.
stop them from building.
Yeah.
So you have impervious from the parking lots on that property, and that's where
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
We have impervious on the R1 already, and we have parking on the R1. Actually, Rob will testify, I believe he said the increase in impervious is 0.02%, Rob? 0.2%.
And your logic is because we all can put generators on our houses. I mean,
That's
that's
correct.
just like an AC. But you're saying because there's not a residential house there for which the generator's purpose is, that's why it's not permitted as an accessory use?
It's an interesting question, because
great, good.
in a residential area, you can put a generator in your residential area. Now, to be safe, I included it in the application because obviously the generator is for a business. So does
Not
that
being used for
make
the
the
property
use? Yeah, so,
Nick, I think that I was aware of this too. This is one lot here, the buildings and the strip. Accessory use, the general provision in 4 is that it's accessory to any use permitted on the lot, which would seem to indicate that you could do it.
Right.
But the definition of accessory use in this district is.
remember this is a residential
in
district. though,
residential
John, yeah,
district,
so it's-
residential
yeah.
district is only for incidental to the foregoing permitted uses, which are basically residential. And I'd have to say that while a generator, a small generator would be incidental to a residence, I think that the generator of the size you're proposing takes it out of the permitted uses in the residential district. And so whereas the general one would permit you to do it, there is a specific one for R1, which I think, limits the general. And
Although
so-
it does say, I believe, also refers to accessory structures, what this is.
I think that's our call, really, because to me, I don't know if there's a restriction if we put a 100 kilowatt backup generator or house or 10. It's our call.
And
Yeah,
you'll
no,
hear-
that's, I'm just, I'm going over what the
you'll
point,
hear
the point is.
testimony
I hear you.
today, actually, too, of the DBAs. I mean, obviously, the concern with generators are noise. I mean, there's no question about it. And you'll hear, because the baffling device is installed on this generator, that this is actually less than a residential generator, on the noise that it emits. And particularly that, not only is it the same or less, but when you get to the property line, is much less. It's basically not noticeable.
I mean,
Okay, yeah, you indicated that you're going
Yeah, I'm gonna
to proceed with this witness and other witnesses, so let me let you continue.
Okay. All right, Rob?
See, I had a question
I'm
for
sorry.
you. On A5, that it shows 2 generators beside one of the buildings, could you describe how those generators relate to the emergency generator, and whether, are these 2 generators owned by Brandywine, and are they under your control?
Neither one of these generators are owned by Brandywine. One is for, both of them actually are for Lincoln Financial Group. One generator backs up their executive floor, which is the A. I know you're not familiar with the building, but inside the 150 building, there are 6 little buildings, buildings A through
Excuse me, talking to Mike,
Yeah, it's on.
I am.
you're turning your head like that.
Sorry. Inside the 150 building, there are 6 little buildings, A through F, and the executives for Lincoln Financial Group are on the 3rd floor of A. So one generator backs up that whole floor for Lincoln. The other generator backs up their server room.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to, we're not recessing here. I just want you to hold everything for about 60 seconds. Why don't you make this determination on this other question with the solicitor? Turn your mic off, John.
I think you're up.
Quick matter of clarification. Mr. Nagel?
Just better to be safe than sorry. I'm going to recuse myself since I'm one of your tenants.
Oh, okay.
And I can speak to those blackouts.
Okay, so,
This will keep your air conditioning on, George.
George, you have to stay, though. Yeah. You can't leave.
I could be a witness.
Well, that's
all right,
really, I mean,
hold on. I'd rather not go back and forth. Thank you. We have a board of 5, and our alternate has been hearing all the testimony and will now be able to participate as a voting member on this. Please continue.
And just one other item, we talked about the use. I know we're jumping ahead to argument, but remember, it says an accessory use is incidental to a permitted use on the lot. The business is a permitted use on the lot.
Yeah, but that says in the specific provisions of R1, they have a slightly different thing, which is tied to permitted R1 uses, not just permitted uses on a lot. And that's the tension. And I think that in this case, it's, you know, the more restrictive provision in R1 trumps the less restrictive provision that applies generally.
Now, remember, for example.
I'm sorry, gentlemen.
Okay.
I want to get the case on.
I'm
If we
sorry.
need to have
Okay.
argument on this point,
I know.
after we get all the evidence in, we'll do that.
That's
Let's stick on the case.
Rob?
Do you solemnly swear, tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And state your full name, please.
Rob Lambert.
Is that Robert
Robert
Lambert?
Lambert.
And what's your profession, Rob?
I'm a civil engineer with Site Engineering Concepts.
And how long have you been a civil engineer?
16 years, 15 years.
Are you registered in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
I am.
And what's your educational background?
I have an undergraduate degree in civil engineering from the University of Notre Dame and a graduate degree in civil engineering from Villanova University.
Have you testified as an expert previously before this board, other boards of the township, other
Yes.
municipal
Many,
boards?
many boards and this board many times.
You prepared the plans for this site?
Yes, I have.
Okay, I'm going to show you A4. Again, we already went through basically the, what is surrounded by. But also, refer to that R1 zoning district. And can you explain to the board where that is? And
So using Exhibit A4, on the left-hand side is Lancaster Avenue running roughly top to bottom. Running left to right, there's a strip of R1 that's 100 feet off of the property line. So it goes off the property line 100 feet. So it goes from left to right, and then it will go back toward the top of the page, and then it goes all the way across parallel with the railroad track that Les referred to that's across the top of the page left to right. So it's parallel with that across the property, and then it jogs back in to go around. There's a Pico transformer up in the right-hand corner. It goes around that site and then down along the eastern property boundary to the property line. And so the area on the outside of the page would be the R1. The area toward the center of the property is the PB.
And that R1 actually line, you're only showing the property, that extends all the way down to Radnor Chester Road?
Correct. It goes out to Radnor Chester Road and it actually goes across Lancaster Avenue.
Now, we mentioned there's various nonconformities on this site. Could you tell the board what nonconformities there are?
So within the R1 zone, there's already parking, so that's an existing nonconformity. The impervious coverage on the property is nonconforming. If you look at the A4 in the bottom left-hand corner is the impervious summary. The existing impervious is nearly 76%, where some blended of 55% and 22% would be permitted. So it's non-conforming to impervious. It was non-conforming to the number of parking spaces and the size of the parking spaces.
And matter of fact, I've attached as A10, which was relief back in 1983, I believe, indicating the nonconformity as to the parking spaces.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, just as a point of fact, in 83, there's a different determination on how you calculated parking spaces. They used your actual net number. Now we use 80% of gross. By the fact that we're using 80% of gross, we're now short approximately 40 parking spaces on this site as to the nonconformity. Now, looking at A5, which is location of the generator, how far is that generator from the railroad track property line?
Actually, I'll use A4 for the distance.
Oh, you use A4? Okay.
Yep. A5 doesn't show the property line. So A4, looking at A4, you can see the generator approximately the center of the page at the top, and you can see the property line right under the words now or formerly or N/F, Lands of Conrail Amtrak, and it would be 50 feet from the Amtrak property line.
And referring to A5, can you just go through the board, what A5 represents?
So A5 is a current topography of the area that was shown on A4, which was the middle top of the page. So you can see at the top of the page are the Conrail Amtrak lines, the railroad tracks. Down to the bottom of A5 is a brown color. Those are the two buildings. The 150 building is the larger building on the right-hand side. And then you can see where the generator is located to the top. So there's existing parking spaces, and then the generator sits to the middle of the top of the page, and there's a small retaining wall around three sides of the generator.
Now, were you able also to perform a profile of the height of the building, or the height of the generator, excuse me?
Yes, we used the existing topography survey that we completed, and then off-site we used publicly available contour information. So we used LiDAR information to generate the approximate profile. So if you look at the left-hand side of Exhibit
Referring to A11 now?
A11, that is the existing office building all the way on the left-hand side. So coming across the parking lot, You would then have the generator, which is shown as a shaded box. And then if you look at the dark line, that's actually the grade line. So the grade line goes all the way up to where the railroad tracks are. And then it dips down a little bit as you go to the other side of the railroad tracks and then continues uphill toward the residences on Glen Mary.
And what significance is there regarding the profile?
So the location of the generator, it was actually pushed in. There's a little bit of a berm or a hill going up to the railroad track. So this generator is actually pushed into that hill. That's the reason we needed the retaining wall. And that hill continues. And so the top of the generator is actually below the rail lines. So if you look at the rail lines, the top of the generator itself, as it would sit there, is below the rail line.
Were you also able to determine the distance to the closest residential neighbors?
It is. It's approximately 450 feet from the generator to the closest neighbor.
And that's Glen Mary?
That's the Glen Mary neighbor.
How about from Cambria Court? Do you know?
I believe it was about 700 feet. And the Cambria Court, using Exhibit A12, is off to the left-hand side of the image. You can see the 150 building. Is it on?
Try it. Go ahead.
Hello? Hello?
No.
No. You can see the 150 building in the center of the page. To the left of the 150 building, you can see the parking immediately adjacent. The berm area was the area that's green adjacent to that, and then you have the railroad tracks. After the railroad tracks, you can see the green area. So that's a treat area adjacent to the railroad tracks, and then the Glen Mary neighbors are up behind there. Again, that was approximately 450 feet from where the generator would be located.
Now, we had mentioned we have a nonconformity in the parking. If you located it on the parking lot, would it exacerbate that nonconformity?
Yes, you'd have to reduce parking, so you'd increase your nonconformity.
Now, as to impervious
Do you have
coverage,
an estimate of how many parking spaces would be eaten up if it was put on the lot?
Using Exhibit A5, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, approximately 8 spaces. But then you also run into an issue of the width. So you may actually, it would be between 8 and 16 spaces, depending on how you can situate it.
Thank you.
now, as to impervious, you mentioned there's also an existing nonconformity as to impervious coverage?
Yes.
And will you be increasing that nonconformity?
Yes, this proposal has 1,850 square feet of additional impervious, which is 0.2% of the property. So when you look at the allowable impervious percentages, it would be, of 55% or 22%. This is 0.2%.
That's 0.2% of the entire lot, not just the R1 strip?
Correct.
Now, as to stormwater management for the impervious, are you taking any precautions regarding stormwater management for the generator?
Yes. Using Exhibit A5, you can see a possible stormwater bed location that is just underneath the parking area adjacent to the generator. This was conceptualized. The Township Code requires the infiltration of the increase in runoff from a 2-year storm event. We're actually proposing the increase in runoff from a 100-year storm event for this location to offset that additional impervious coverage.
Any questions for the engineer regarding the site?
Yeah, I mean, did you look at actually putting it adjacent to the buildings? Because I've been in buildings where we've had generators that are literally 15 feet from our building. And if it's so quiet, then it's not really that big.
I know they've looked at other locations. Other locations would need, you have impervious relief, you have proximity to the electrical transfer area, so there were other factors that drove us to this location. This location also benefits by being able to push it into the hill and diminish its impact.
Not your question, but any other types of backup systems like Tesla batteries or something that could be put in a basement? I don't know who can answer that, but that's a question.
I wanted to ask, did you look inside the buildings? Was there any areas in the basement areas or lower levels where this could have been put?
I'd have to defer to the generator folks to be able to answer that question.
Okay, no other questions at this time for this witness?
Just one quick question, I'm sorry, as a
Okay.
follow-up. Is there any location, feasible location, to put this generator elsewhere on the site that would comply with zoning?
No, you need other relief.
And that other relief would either be parking relief or impervious coverage relief?
Correct.
No other questions from the board at this point for this witness?
And if you raise your right hand, you do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your full name, please.
Melissa Miller,
And Missy, by whom are you employed?
Cummins Power Systems.
And
I'm
what's
sorry,
Cummins-
I can't hear that.
Oh, Cummins Power Systems.
Thomas?
Cummins, Cummins.
And what is Cummins Power System?
We are the Cummins engine generator distributor for the local Philadelphia area.
And what's your position with Cummins?
I am the local territory sales manager.
And what's your educational background?
I am a mechanical engineer by degree.
Now, we mentioned this generator. Has anything been done to this generator? And, well, let me back up a minute.
Yeah.
There were some questions raised by the board regarding backup systems or systems inside the building. Is that
Yeah.
feasible in this instance?
I just briefly spoke with Don, and a generator this size requires a tremendous amount of airflow, and there is no room within the building to put this generator because of the airflow that would be required. It would require not only a tremendous amount of ceiling height, but also a tremendous amount of airflow to get it in, to keep it running.
And we're talking about the size because of how many square feet is servicing.
Right. The amount of power required, 2,500 kW for the 3 buildings and all the tenants. It's a huge generator, and it would not fit within the building.
What about on the
Try and
roof?
use the microphone, please.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I've stepped away. I apologize
What
about
about
that.
the roof?
The roof, these are existing buildings, so the roof would have, I'm not sure the roof would be able to capable of handling that kind of weight. Again, they usually have to be built, designed for that up front to handle, so I don't know if the analysis was done, but
Do
more
you
than
know anything
likely.
about noise if it was on the roof, or should I defer that?
Again, you can, the same kind of thing, you'd have the noise would be going towards the north, which is what we've done on this. We have, purchased the Taj Mahal of enclosures. I mean, kind of we alluded to it in the first time, when the first, question and answer session. What we did with this is we purchased a 40 dBA enclosure. We're redirecting the sound north, which is similar to what you'd be doing on the roof as well. But you have an intake baffle, you have a discharge baffle. We've redirected the noise north. We have a hospital-grade silencer inside the enclosure. You spoke about putting it closer to the building. If you move this generator closer to the building, that noise is going to reflect against the solid surface and actually deflect that noise out towards the property line. So it actually would be more of a detriment moving it closer to the building because of the hard, solid surface of the walls. Moving it towards that berm, kind of putting it up against that nice foliage and the arborvitaes and all the other greens, that helps.
I wanted to ask you that you're talking about one large generator with 3 buildings. Did you look at the possibility of having one generator for each building and having smaller sizes that might accommodate them?
I was not the electrical engineer on this project, so I don't know what was looked at in the design phase. I would assume installation-wise, 3 generators, 3 sources of noise, that would be similar situation. I mean, the noise levels that we've gotten this down to, we spoke briefly about getting this down to a quieter than residential generator set. So you would have 3 sources of noise. 3 sources of noise when you put 3 noise sources together, they actually start to increase with each other. So we would have to find locations for all 3 of those generators.
Well, I meant with 1 per building. I didn't mean having 3 of them on the land area.
I don't know if they would have to find locations for them, parking issues,
Okay.
I'm not sure what I wasn't involved in the design phase as to how they chose a single unit
And
versus
would
3
these
individuals.
generators just be on when there's a power outage, so that we're talking about maybe 40 hours a year
Oh,
or
I
something
see
like
so
that.
many
If
generators
it's
that are never run.
Excuse me?
I see so many generators that
That
are never run.
so
Yeah,
this
they're 20
noise
years old with, you know,
issue's going to be
300
for a
hours.
fairly
Yeah, yeah.
contained, limited time. It's not meant to run the power
Yep.
for these buildings for
No,
a
no,
long.
no. You're not literally allowed to run them for anything other than a power outage and for exercising. So
Is there either a policy or a recommended approach in terms of sort of running them to test them once every, I'm curious what that,
it's normally, and it's really up to the owner, but the minimum we recommend is once a month.
for how long a period?
It's usually no more than an hour from startup to shutdown.
Nick, if we could get the property manager to come up, just, I'd like to explore the roof option. Because it seems like he's got some rooftop units on there, and that means that the roof is load-bearing significantly.
Yeah.
Again, but you can finish whenever you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll bring him back up.
Yeah.
Oh,
So he has one for me?
one other question. Who designed the baffling that you're putting in here?
Okay, so, and what we did is we worked with Pritchard Brown on this to get the 40 dBA reduction. You know, our history, I've worked with Cummins for 23 years now, and in our experience, Pritchard Brown is the, you know, they're basically the Cadillac of enclosures. They are the ones that have the most experience and are able to guarantee that kind of sound reduction. So they are the enclosure company we went with for this. You know, we're starting off with roughly a 96 dBA enclosure. We've gotten it down, you know, easily 65, 50, what do we do, 56 dBA, 23 feet. So we are now quieter than a residential enclosure. We did that by doing the intake and discharge baffles. Rick will be able to attest to the actual technical aspects of how they did it. But that's how we chose them, because of their knowledge and their expertise in the matter.
Rick? I'm sorry, any questions?
Oh,
I'm sorry, one other question. Is this diesel or natural gas?
it is diesel.
Okay. So there's a fuel tank?
There is a sub-base tank underneath of it.
Okay, thank you.
Missy, how much does the unit weigh?
Oh, I have the drawings. You want me to get them?
Sure, please.
Yep. Estimated unit completed without fuel, so we have to add 7,000, 7 pounds per gallon, is 152,000 pounds. So that would be an awful lot for that roof to take.
Les, you're still under oath. Do you want to address that issue as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I mean, we have air handlers up there. We have a problem then when we run the generator with air intake. The exhaust from that generator is going to be sucked back into the building. That's why we wanted to keep it away from the building. And the weight, we would really have to, it's like a supermarket roof when you go up there, and it would not support the weight.
I mean, I think kind of like what Bud was saying, I wouldn't be proposing to put one unit. I think you'd be putting 3 units, one on each building. So therefore, your load would be dramatically different. And honestly, I used to sell air handlers, so you can work around intakes. That's not that hard.
I wanted to answer Bud's question also.
Sure.
The 150 building is where all the switchgear is, and the 130 and 170 buildings are slaves to that building. So everything comes into 150 and then feeds to the 170 and 130 building. So to put it in the 130, we'd have to come back.
Okay.
So that's your incoming main?
Yes.
Okay. So then the electrical engineer thought of that and chose that.
Okay, any questions of the most recent witness? Continue.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And state your full name, please.
Richard Hackley,
And spell that.
Hackley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, by whom are you employed?
Pritchard Brown LLC,
How long have you been employed by Pritchard Brown?
33 years.
And what's your position with Pritchard Brown?
Sales and project manager and business development.
What's your educational background?
High school education and 3 years of architectural engineering.
And how long have you been dealing with sound being generated from different devices?
About 30 years.
Have you testified and worked on these type of projects previously?
Many, yes.
Now, on this particular device, you've heard testimony regarding certain noise reduction devices.
Correct.
Can you tell the board what devices are being installed?
What we do is we're a custom enclosure manufacturer, so we take every job individually and build a custom enclosure. It's not a conveyor belt type design. It's custom built per unit. Each one is custom designed, engineered, and submitted based on the requirements of the job site.
Please use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. And what we basically do is take the requirements that are given to me, the specifications, and we design it around that. When I'm given a certain dB level requirement, I make sure I meet that. And then we submit it and get it that way. We have acoustical engineers that we deal with on the baffling. We've got 50 years of experience, even longer than I've been with the company, as far as doing the attenuation on the walls, the floors, building the fuel tanks, and setting up the whole design. We have done load test, certified the acoustic test that we have, and done all the homework to get there, to make sure we guarantee. It's too big of a job to get out there and not guarantee the sound. I guarantee what the enclosure will do.
And the enclosure, what exactly is the enclosure?
What is it?
Yes, it barrier walls, absorbers?
It's a combination of everything. It's aluminum enclosure, mill finish, pre-painted, maintenance-free, automobile finish enclosure. Inside, it's all acoustic, fiberglass, baffling, perforated lining, to be tested, along with, I've got them out there 20, 30 years and still doing great.
Is this kind of what they're proposing here? Is this an industry standard, or is it a little more than that?
It's a lot more than that. I mean, the industry standard, just to give perspective, is like a 20 to 25 dBA reduction enclosure. That's an average. This is a 40 reduction. And my figures are always conservative.
Now, what type of grade would this be? I mean, there's...
Extreme hospital is what I call it. I'm using extreme hospital grade silencer, and this is the best of the best.
Okay, when measuring sound, what standard is used?
We use the A scale on measuring dBA for decibels, and we cover the frequencies between 63 and 8,000 hertz to get an average measurement of what the frequency is going to be. So we know what, there's a difference between frequencies of penetrating the wall and absorbing, and we have to determine which one's happening on. The lower frequencies want to penetrate, the higher frequencies, they want to stay inside the enclosure. So we have to deal with both of them, along with dealing with the airflow for the radiator and make sure it doesn't overheat. So it's a balancing act that you have to find.
Okay, so we're going to be referring to dBAs.
Yes, sir.
What's a dBA?
dBA is a sound of measurement that the human ear can tolerate. Okay, you can determine what a dBA level is versus just a decibel. It's a C level. The human ear can hear it, but it doesn't determine what it is. dBA is something everybody can relate to.
Okay, now, in reference to a device like this, is there a standard distance you use for measuring dBAs?
Everything is measured based on 7 meters. I'm sorry, 23 feet, 7 meters.
And if there was no enclosure, none of the baffling devices that you're installing here, what would be the dBAs at 23 feet?
According to Cummins literature, it was 96 dBA.
And with the sound attenuating devices you're installing, what would be the dBA at 23 feet?
Well, we're reducing it by 40, so you're going to be around 56 dBA.
Right now, when you say, and remember, this is 23 feet. This isn't
right.
50 feet.
No, that's correct. That's 23 feet away.
But when you say 56 dBA, what would you say that would be about equivalent to?
Soft conversation,
All right? So it'd be like a conversation.
like we're having right now.
What's a standard condensing unit at a house?
Typically around 69, 70. Mhm. To
Now-
give you a perspective of what we're talking about.
Now, by reducing it 40 dBAs, are you reducing acoustic?
Excuse me, acoustic energy is measured in dBA, and you're basically, at 40 dBA, you're reducing it 99.9%, to the point where any more, you're just not going to hear it, the difference any longer.
Right now, what's ambient level? And first tell me what ambient level means.
Ambient is an ambiguous number. Depends on where you are. If you're in New York City, your ambient's going to be 80 because of the traffic and the horns and the noise that's going on. If you're in the country, your ambient's going to be 40 because cows don't make any noise. So it varies. It all depends on what's going on. If you're inside this building, you hear the air conditioner, it's probably around 45 or 50. You know,
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
On how you do this measurement? Do these enclosures have doors to them?
Yes, sir.
Does it need, so if somebody's running this machine but doesn't close the door, is the sound numbers that you're giving us then not valid?
That's correct.
So in
The
other
doors have to be
words,
closed.
the management of the buildings had better do this right, or else the whole sound numbers you're giving us really are going to be.
That's correct. The only reason, but these doors, I've never been to a job site where these doors are not locked and secured. This is an emergency generator, so this is going to run whether somebody's there or not. It comes on automatically, okay? You know, I don't care what it is. So
But if somebody didn't lock it or didn't close it, or filled it up and didn't close it, it's possible
Yes, sir.
that there wouldn't be somebody that would say, oh, this door's not shut.
Anything's possible, yes.
And then the second question I have for you, this is a very large generator, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So the kind of enclosure that you do for that is much different than you would do for a smaller one. So could you give us just a little bit of an idea about what you have to do special to this one versus a typical size generator?
The biggest problem with this unit is the airflow. Because it's a 2,500 kW, it requires, I forgot about 100,000 CFM. That's a lot of air to quiet down and to not let the genset overheat on a day like today where it's 98 degrees outside. It has to be able to back up and run. So what I do on those type of units is everything I bring in is horizontal. There's a lot of jobs I can bring in vertical. I can bring them in through the sides of the units right next to the generator. When they get this large, I can't do that. So I have to come in the rear of this thing and make it longer to prevent two things. One, noise from escaping, and weather from getting inside.
So you plan this out pretty well, pretty
Absolutely.
thoroughly to make it happen?
Yes, sir.
Well, after it's constructed, is there then a test done to see whether your plans were correct, that these DBA numbers work out, so the people will know that the sound is what you've said?
Not on every one. Now, sometimes they will require a sound test once it's installed. Sometimes they'll ask me to do a sound test, but that's not on every job.
But would there be one on this particular job?
I don't know the answer to that, and not on my part of it.
For
no.
something this big, would there typically be a sound test done?
Not necessarily. I mean, it does happen. There are places where they do require it, but it's not on every single job.
Thank you.
Is it customary, and customary is the wrong word, are generators of this size frequently seen in this close proximity to residential areas?
Oh, many closer. Yes, absolutely.
Now, do DBAs reduce the further you are?
Yes, yes, they do.
And you heard some testimony here that the closest neighbor is 450 feet away?
Correct.
All right, so is there a formula on how you determine reduction of DBAs?
There have been different formulas put out there in public. We've actually gone out and done testing. So we have a theoretical way of doing it where every time you double and there's two things with noise levels. There's what they call near field and far field. If you're 6 feet away from a generator and you double the distance to 12 feet, you're not going to get a lot of reduction out of the distance. But if you're 50 feet and you go to 100 feet, you double the distance, you get a lot of reduction then. Go 100 feet to 200 feet, so on and so forth. The rule of thumb, and this is all based on free field conditions and non-contributing ambient noise levels. In other words, there's no trucks around, there's no airplanes going overhead, there's no trains coming by. You lose 6 dB every time you double the distance, based on far field noise levels, not near field. So in other words, when you're at 3 feet, you go to 6 feet, you're not losing 6 dB, it just doesn't happen. It won't happen within the first 50 feet. And this is based on us going out into the field and testing them. Many, many, many units.
Okay, so assuming the closest neighbor is 450 feet away.
Mhm.
What would be the DBA at that neighbor's property line?
That's impossible to say because, I mean, I want to say, there again, theoretically, okay,
Theoretically.
under ideal conditions with hard reflective surface and, free field conditions, you're going to lose 6 dB on the first 100, 6 dB on the second 200. So you're looking at 56, 46, with my math is right, what, 42, 40, something like that?
And-
Below ambient is what it boils
Okay,
down
now,
to.
What do you mean by below ambient? What does that mean when you say below ambient?
It means it's not contributing to ambient noise. In other words, your ambient noise, what's in here, it would not, if that generator was running 450 feet away, you won't hear it.
So that's what so would you, 450 feet away, with the devices you're putting on this generator, would you be able to hear it?
In free field conditions, no, sir.
In the middle of the night?
Again.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
We will allow for people to have,
Okay.
to share their perspectives after
Okay.
the case is put on. Hold that thought.
There are extenuating circumstances. I mean, weather controls ambient noise. Nighttime does because there's less traffic, there's less noise, all you hear are crickets. There's so many contributing factors. I can't stand here and tell you 100% because I don't know what the ambient is at the neighbor's house. It's impossible for me to say that.
Okay, so say that ambient at nighttime, what is normally ambient level?
Again, it depends on the neighborhood.
Okay.
Everybody, it depends on traffic and where you at, hard reflective surfaces. If you're near the water, it's noisier
Okay,
because,
but knowing what, you saw the site.
Well, with the trees and everything, which is beautiful, it's going to be quiet. I would assume it's pretty quiet out there at night.
You've heard some testimony about putting 3 generators instead of 1.
Mhm.
Does that contribute to noise or to DBAs?
The smaller the generator, they do get a little bit quieter, depending on the relationship of where you're putting them, of whether they contribute to each other. Now, I don't know the building layout as far as the power source. If one part of the building can go out and another part stay on, maybe only one goes on at one time. I don't know the answer to that. I can only tell you that if there are 3 fairly significantly sized generators, if you got 2,500, so let's say you got 2 or 3 1,000 kW generators, they're still fairly close to the same noise level. They're going to add to each other, unless they're far away, unless they're on different sides of the building.
If they're higher up, now remember this generator is kind of protected by banks and the
Right.
railroad tracks and trees and things of that nature. If you put them on a building higher up, would that increase DBA?
Yes, it increases DBA and creates a whole nother bunch of other issues, because I don't know the codes here. Most buildings aren't allowed to have fuel on top of the roof. If they do, they're very small day tanks. Then you have to put a base tank somewhere in a basement or underground or somewhere else. Then you have to have pumping systems, alarm systems to pump it up to the rooftop. So you've created a whole lot of other items. The other thing is the substructure. Is it designed for it? I don't know the answer to that either. Then you have to treat the underneath of it to be able to keep it from getting noisier. So there's a couple aspects putting it on a roof that are negative. The main reason anybody puts generators on a rooftop is they don't have real estate. They don't have a choice. I have a lot of generators in New York City, in Philadelphia itself, because they don't have the real estate anywhere else. They don't have the option. So they have fuel tanks already in ground underneath the buildings, and they pump it up to the generators on top. But these buildings have been designed for it.
I have nothing.
Any questions of this witness?
What's the DBA of a train?
I'm sorry?
The DBA of a train? Since this is right
50
next to
feet
the-
away, it was 78.
78?
Yes,
Actually,
sir.
you did that measurement today,
Yes,
correct?
we did that. I went over to the site and did that.
Yeah.
Now, that was at where the generator was going to be.
Okay.
Any other questions? Nick, any other witnesses?
No, we don't.
Do you want to put in your exhibits?
Please, I request exhibits to be part of the record, please.
Okay, thank you. Are there other folks here who would like to be heard on this matter? You come on up. If there are, you just come on up. And please start by introducing yourself, be ready to be sworn in, and then share with the board your residence so we can have a perspective.
Sir, are you Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your full name, please.
Kenneth Hahn,
And spell that.
H-A-H-N.
And use the microphone, please.
I am the closest neighbor. I'm right behind this building. They
Mr.
have four
Mr.
generators on
Mr.
site
Hahn,
right
provide
now.
us your specific address.
600 Glen Mary Road.
Okay, and to the extent you can, share with us with some specificity where your home is, and then provide your,
I need the other plan,
your thoughts on this.
the big plan.
I'm sure council will share that.
I can do it from here, basically.
It may be better.
I'm directly off that corner of this building.
Would that be?
It's hard to, my
But one of
finger
those homes
being in
there.
the way, I'm right there.
Thank you very much.
This building's here.
Okay.
I'm right there.
Okay.
Mr. Hahn, please feel free to share with us your perspective on this application.
I just drove by the building today. I have not been by that building previously. They do have four generators sitting on the site right now. And they did mention we do lose power quite often. It happens. I hear the generators now. I hear Lancaster Avenue from so saying you've got 40 dBA, 50, 60, whatever, you're not going to hear anything. At midnight, you're going to hear it. You're not going to sleep through it, especially when I don't have air conditioning, I don't have anything, and I've got no power as well. My biggest thing, and Mr. Hirsch here, and I think you did as well, have they explored any other locations? I think not. I think it needs to be pushed out to the front of the building. I don't have that larger plan, the one you're looking at right now. That's not up here. I would say that the same distance would be to the room that they're trying to get to. And then they're digging through dirt, they're not going underneath the parking lot. But they don't want it at the front of their building because that impacts the look of the front of their building. But that would be towards all other commercial spaces. It wouldn't impact the residents at all. It'd be hemmed in by the buildings, the sound levels. Then they could deal with the sound, not the residents.
Mr. Hahn, we have to ask you this specific question. Are you opposed to this application?
I'm opposed to the location,
So you're opposed to the application that's been presented because that's the location?
to that location.
That's all?
And to clarify, that question will be asked of any witnesses who testify, and it's somewhat of a formality to establish the record necessary should you seek to become a party in any subsequent matters relating to this. So that's why council asked the question, that's why he asked that specifically. Do any of the board members have any questions of Mr. Hahn? Thank you very much.
All right.
Sir, you do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And your full name, please?
My name is James Carino, C-A-R-I-N-O, and I'm a resident of 116 Cambria Court.
Going to try to share with you this photograph. Please put it on the table so people can see it, and do your best to share with us a perspective on where, move it a little bit more toward the center of the screen.
I believe we are approximately right here.
Okay, thank you. Share with the board your perspective on the application.
Terrific. My wife Ann Carino and I purchased the property in 1994. My wife Ann was born at that residence on October 2nd of 1961. I think I just revealed her age. I apologize in advance.
You're the second person in trouble tonight who's done that.
We are Radnor lifers, and we have 2 children that were raised through the Radnor school system, and we've recently empty nested. This is not my first time before the Zoning Commission or the Planning Commission or the Board of Commissioners, and it's usually around the buffer planning strip. On one occasion, I think it was Nick who was representing TD Bank. There was a challenge to the 100-foot strip. I don't know what you call it. So my first concern relates to the integrity of that strip, because it's very important to us as a resident that's adjacent to the property. And I do believe that it's challenged on a periodic basis. We heard tonight that there were a number of properties that were non-conforming already, and it makes me very uncomfortable when the notion of that 100-foot strip is challenged. Also, as part of that strip, there is a buffer planning strip. I think you might be familiar with it, but there's a requirement for buffering, and that's been a challenge to have that ordinance, or whatever you call it, enforced. It's very difficult to enforce those. So that's a general comment. Secondly, one of the generators produces a tremendous noise already to our house, and I don't know where it is, I assume it's next to 555. But as was mentioned earlier today, there were 19 occasions in the last, 2 years or so. I can tell you that that's a new phenomenon. In the 23 years that we lived at Cambria Court, we probably lost power less than once a year. And then something changed. And that's recent. And I can tell you that if power goes off for 1 second, the generator runs for 12 hours, by definition. So I just want to make clear here, there could be something different about this particular generator, but it doesn't matter what the length of power loss is. And it hits our house, it hits it hard, it's impacted our holiday dinners, okay? It actually, in our dining room, is a part of the event. So I would be delighted that as part of their solution, Radnor, for them to also address that with all of the buffering technology that we've heard about today. So I don't know what to comment except for those two concerns, the concerns about the integrity of the strip itself, and I am skeptical of the noise situation based on what I've mentioned to you.
Do you oppose the application as presented?
I do, with
that's okay. That's
I do,
okay.
but with the caveat that there needs to be a generator solution, and if it goes somewhere else, it could still impact us. There's no clear, I haven't seen a clear answer yet tonight.
Yeah, and just, there was a case at the Commonwealth Court where a person appealed a zoning decision. They had been unclear about whether they opposed it. It was a great big procedural mess up, and to avoid that, we ask everybody before the board whether they are opposing it, just so that won't go, nothing will come from this board and create the same procedural mess again.
I do oppose it at the moment. If this had been shared with the neighborhood prior to this evening and we had a chance to think about it and digest it, understand what had been thought through, what the alternatives are, I may have a different position.
But your position now is you oppose?
At this moment, correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Carino, did you receive notice of this evening's
We
hearing?
did.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, clear. Yep.
Any other questions of this witness? Nick, do you have any? I can't see you, I just.
Nick?
Okay. You have no questions of the witness?
Just one quick one, Mr. Carino. I think actually you're probably one of these buildings over here, right? We're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're
'Cause
right.
I think you
That was
pointed.
wrong.
Yeah, I think you pointed to like the
That's
green
dead
space.
wrong.
Yeah, it's one of the. I assume it's one of these or one of these up by 555.
Correct, probably. You're absolutely right. It's 700 feet,
Okay.
so it is
Yes.
further, much further. You're right.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you.
That's all.
Nick, could one of your witnesses address the question of the implications of the generator being kicked on and whether there are any minimum periods within which it will continue to run without regard to whether the regular power comes back on or not?
Missy? Or who would? Missy, I would ask you first from a mechanical standpoint, and then I'll ask Les and how long they kick on and how long they go off.
Please use the mic,
12
I can
hours.
hear you.
Okay, so let's repeat, I'm sorry.
The witness made the point that it's been his experience with another generator, we don't know whether it's off this property or
Okay, we
otherwise,
don't.
that
We're not
once it
talking
goes on, it stays on for 12 hours.
Okay.
So my question is not, that is context for my question, which is what is the generator that's being proposed to be installed, can you shed some light on when it comes on, whether as a matter of its properties, it will stay on for some minimum period?
Right, okay. For testing, and, we'll let you attest to how long you do for exercising, but normally, we're just going to run them for test for, an hour. That's usually what it does. I mean, they can test for more than that if they want to do it for, once a week. They can choose to do more than that if they want to. Like I said, we, as a manufacturer, try to recommend, as a worst case, once a month. For a power outage, and I'm not familiar with what generator this is, so I can't speak to that, but normally, the code requires that you let this thing run for the duration of the power outage, and then it goes right back over to normal as soon as the power comes back up, if it's a standby generator only. So, unless there's
Now,
I can't speak to that.
Now, as to this generator.
This generator,
Tonight.
yes. It is going to, it's a standby generator, so while there's a power outage, if it's a very short power outage, it's going to start up, it's going to run as soon as the normal power is back, and it's within, the range that we've set it for. It's a good, healthy power supply. It's going to transfer back, it's going to go through a short cool-down cycle, and it's going to turn back off.
How long is a short cool-down cycle?
Again, that's also adjustable. I think the usual minimum is 20 minutes.
Now, we say.
Adjustable by whom?
The technician at startup. But I believe the minimum recommended by us, I'd have to check our engine manual, but I believe each engine's different, but usually it's 20 minutes minimum.
So during the cool down, though, does that still run at?
It
top
is
level?
running unloaded, so it is actually a quieter, lower decibel rating, because it's running unloaded. It's idling.
And that was kind of my question, does the decibel level change by load? So,
Yes,
for
it does.
example, if it's at nighttime, there's no computers running other than normal servers,
Right.
not all this, so it should be quieter.
Yeah, the 96 dBA we're printing in our literature and that we're talking about, and we're taking our 40 dBA reduction from, is at a fully heavily loaded generator set. And I've never seen a generator set designed to run more than, if we're lucky, 80% loaded. So we're talking worst-case scenarios when we're giving these numbers. Most engineers design somewhere in the 60 to maybe 80% range loaded. So these numbers are definitely worst-case scenarios.
And when it's operated for testing purposes, what's the load built into the test run?
Well, and again, I'm not sure if you operate loaded or unloaded. Unloaded? Okay, so these are unloaded numbers. So this is running unloaded.
In terms of coming up with the recommendation of a generator, do you do a survey of the load needs and of the property and look at the different options and then present to the ownership options, that kind of thing?
I can. I've done that before for
Did
other
you do that
customers.
in this case?
Particular unit, I did not. They had another electrical engineer.
So an electrical engineer did that work, and so you didn't know what options were considered and whether...
No, I worked with him on it once he had already selected the size. I mean, I definitely worked with the engineer on the project. So I was, I definitely coordinated with him, but he worked
Well, once
with
you
the
s-
customer on the size. And
Well, once you come up with the size, and that kind of limits what your options are for location and what can be done.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, once we knew it was a large generator set, we knew we had to do the best thing we could for the sound, obviously, as pertains to, we want to keep,
But-
this is a near a residential area. So we knew we had a 2,500 kW. We looked at a 40 dBA enclosure, so we had to work with that.
Yeah.
But even, as I think Rick mentioned, even if we'd have gone with some smaller enclosures, and I won't go into too much technical detail, but the 60-liter engine that is on this 2,500 kW would have been used down to a 2,000 kW generator set. So even if they'd have chosen to shed some load or maybe take some power away from some of their customers, it still would have been down. You'd have been using a lot of the noise comes from the radiator. It still would have been down to a 2,000 kW with almost the very same amount of noise.
Did you look at other physical locations for this generator on the site?
Again, I wasn't in the design, like, I've been involved in these meetings, since we've been talking about the sound, after it was chosen. And obviously, as they spoke, this is the nearest service entrance to the building. Once you start moving it further, and I am not electrical, I'm mechanical, but once you start moving it further and further away from the building, obviously other considerations come involved, line drop and some
Okay.
other considerations.
Just one last question. In terms of diesel, is there an air quality level that you look at, and was that considered, and was that any impact on this?
It's a tier 2 emission, low emissions engine, so we already meet the current emissions requirements for the engine, so there's no worries with that either.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the board members have questions of any of the witnesses here? John?
Yes. Property manager? I forget your name, I'm sorry. It's here somewhere. In terms of the scheduling of the test operation of the generator, I'm assuming you have the flexibility to basically elect whatever time you choose to operate it for test purposes, is that right?
Correct.
When would you typically run the test operation of the generator?
Usually, we like to do it early in the morning or in the evening time, so it doesn't impact people like Mr. Carino when he's sleeping in the middle of the night.
When you say early in the morning, what do you? I mean, that's-
Those are some of my favorite sleeping times.
5 a.m. doesn't work, yeah.
6 o'clock, usually it's between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, we can test it.
Would you be materially inconvenienced if you were required to operate it for test purposes during business hours?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Just a couple questions. I'm sorry, unless.
Go ahead.
The 555 building has a generator on it, correct?
Nick, I can't hear
The
you.
555 building has a generator on it, and that's probably the generator Mr. Carino is referring to, I assume, right?
Exactly.
Have you ever received any complaints from anyone regarding the noise from any of your generators?
No.
And then the other generators that are on the site, they are actually inside the building, correct? Or on the other side of the building, as you pointed out here, there's 2 of them?
They're tenant generators.
And so they were installed by the tenant?
Yes.
Do they have any baffling devices on them?
I'm sure that they have what is standard, but nothing extra.
Okay, like what you're doing here?
Right.
Okay.
Did you investigate stuff like the power pack from Tesla? Just having a battery backup system that has no noise, does not encroach the environment. It's actually pretty good for the environment, but
I haven't personally looked at that, but I would imagine that it's got to be a humongous amount of batteries that we would need to operate that building entirely.
but it's possible.
Anything's possible, I guess. But no, I have not investigated that.
Any other questions? Okay.
The one thing I did want to mention, if the new generator gets put in, the 2 little generators that we have here by the tenants will not be operated. They won't need them anymore. I only know of 3.
Hold on. For purposes of our record, let me rephrase the question this way. Is it your testimony that if your application is approved, that there will be no separate tenant generators utilized for these 3 buildings?
At these 3 buildings, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, now I'm intrigued.
I'm sorry, now we have more questions.
Sorry. I'm intrigued by the tenant generators. They presumably were installed pursuant to some right given to the tenant under its lease with the owner?
Yes, sir.
Do other tenants have a similar right, or was that a special right given to the particular tenant in question, given the size of the tenancy?
Because the building did not have a full building generator, the tenants came to us and said, would you mind if we installed a generator in the back of the building? And we approved that.
And
What was that for? I mean, what does that service? Does that service the whole building, a floor? What does it service?
Well, actually, the one generator only services the Lincoln Financial Group's server room. It's like 5,000 feet of space. That's all. The other generator services the entire third floor of the A building, which is the executive offices for Lincoln Financial Group.
And how many square feet of space is that?
It's about 30,000 feet.
And I'm assuming there aren't instances where there would be if there's a power outage requiring the operation of a backup generator, all 3 buildings will be affected?
Yes. Yes.
May I ask a question? You say they will be discontinued. Do the tenants have any rights under their leases to, say we're not going to do it? I mean, do they have the right to maintain the generator?
I mean, they had the right to put them in, so do you have the right to require them to take them out? And can you show us that?
You can condition any approval on that. That's probably the best way to do it.
But I'm assuming, I mean, to the extent that the tenant has the right to do something, I don't know how the lease is drawn such that the landlord has a superseding right to undo the tenant's right to have those generators. So even if it's a condition to a possible grant of the variance, I would want to know that you actually have the ability under your lease to require them to remove them. They might just like having them. I mean, the C-suite, their own generator, it's always going to be nice and cool. I mean, it's kind of nice.
I understand that. We do have the right to ask them to remove it, and we do if they leave the building, they have to remove the generator. GuideWorks, which was a tenant in the building years ago, which is the division of Comcast, had a generator in the same location that Lincoln put their generator. And when they left, we required that they remove the generator.
Yeah, but again, the inquiry goes to the fact of whether a tenant who is continuing its tenancy in the building is subject to the tenant requiring them to remove a generator, which you've testified they had the right to install.
John, let me suggest that while the tenant may not be required to the extent it's a condition imposed upon the grant of relief, the tenant's rights, if not waived, may obviate the authority they might receive from this board. So it would be upon them to explain to the tenant that it's in the tenant's interest to allow for the removal of that smaller generator because it's a condition to the installation of a bigger one.
We would not be able to use the bigger generator if the smaller generator still remained.
All right. Okay.
And these smaller generators would not be needed if we put the larger generator in. The little ones will never go online.
I think the tenant would probably save the maintenance and operating costs that they probably pay to keep that generator up and running. Is that
And again,
excuse me?
we talked about how generators on buildings, on the independent buildings, you said there's a main power feed, and this obviously triggered my brain saying you have 3 separate generators right now running different locations on your property, so it is feasible. If you have 3 separate generators running different areas within buildings, you can clearly have 3 different generators powering the buildings.
Yeah, but
So here's my only question. Did you explore having generators, multiple generators, single generator on the physical property, having those in locations? Because clearly, if there's a location on the property that does not require a variance, you don't get a variance.
we have not explored that to my knowledge, But in order to put 3 separate generators in for each separate building, we would have to add additional equipment in order to fire up the electrical capacity for each building. All our power from PECO comes in through the 150 building.
I get it.
And-
three generators existing today.
Right. And they're doing just certain areas of tenant spaces.
So it's possible, but.
We're going to end questioning. Nick, I'd like you to articulate for me and for the other members of the board the relief that you're seeking. And to the extent there are, in the alternative arguments, just lay it out logically as you often do, just to help us focus on what it is you're looking for.
Okay, the first relief is the use in the residential area. And again, I believe that really this relief is not required. There's a difference between accessory uses and accessory structures. For example, in the R1, it does talk about certain accessory uses, which are uses accessory to the main use. They talk about private garage or garage space. They talk about home occupations. They talk about agricultural uses. They're uses. This does not mention the construction of a shed. A shed is an accessory structure, not an accessory use, because it is still part of the residential use. In fact, in the R1 district, it talks about accessory structures and says accessory structures to a use permitted shall be located as designated hereunder. And it talks attached to a building or 10 feet from the building, 10 feet from the property line. So there's a difference between accessory structures and accessory uses. In this instance, this is an accessory structure that's part of the main use being the use as an office building. So one of the requests for relief and the alternative that I requested was a variance from that residential zone, and in the alternative that it was permitted by right. We already have an existing nonconformity in that area with the parking as it currently exists. The second request for relief was the impervious coverage. As Rob Lambert, the engineer, testified, that increase in impervious coverage is 0.2%. In addition to that increase, Rob is actually taking it a bit further as to the stormwater management, in that he would only be required to manage or infiltrate a 2-year storm, and in fact, he's going to infiltrate a 100-year storm. The other question, which we're not really dealing with, is the parking, because the parking's remaining the same, so we would not need relief on the parking requirement. But from my understanding, the only two really areas of relief we would need is one on impervious coverage and two on whether the use is permitted or not. And if it's not permitted, then we would need relief to have this use in the residential zone.
And with reference to the testimony we've heard over the last hour or so, were the board to conclude that the variance is required for the use within the residential, the structure within the residential area, and also as to the impervious coverage, how would you articulate the hardship to the property owner behind its request for the variance?
The one hardship, obviously, on the use is this property is unique in that it is surrounded by a ring of residential area. If this was not surrounded by a ring of residential area, the only relief we would be asking for here this evening is on the impervious coverage. As to the impervious coverage, I think in today's world everyone understands during power outages, particularly in this area where for some reason seems to be more prevalent than other areas, businesses need to operate during power outages. It's very common for for most or a lot of office buildings now, particularly when you're talking about a grade 1 office building, grade A office building like we have here at Radnor Financial, that generators are installed so that there's no loss of man hours in the business. In order to move forward with their business, in order to modernize, In order to be competitive with the rest of the market, it's required for Brandywine to put this generator at these locations to service these buildings.
One last factual question. Are you aware from your work with this client of any efforts either recently or further back to seek a rezone of this residential property?
I am not. I never did it, and I don't recall ever a rezone of this residential strip here.
Okay.
I don't even know if we ever asked for relief on it. I remember Mr. Carino, we were involved in something previously. Was it TD?
TD Bank
When it down.
closer to the street.
Oh, that's right, down on Radnor Chester Road, yeah, on Radnor Chester Road.
So that's a case where relief was sought as
Right,
opposed to a
exactly.
rezoning.
It wasn't a rezoning,
Okay,
no,
all right.
it was not a rezoning.
So I'm just going to, we're going to close out on questions now.
I just have one more question. It's a simple one. I'm just, when you're talking about the 2.2% of impervious, you're including the entire lot, both R1 and PB. Have you done the calculation for just R1?
Rob, do you have that, or I looked at that. It looked like, I don't even know if we would need relief if we were looking at the R1, but if you look at the R1, it's
That's kind of my
mainly all
question.
green.
But, oh, so your just the assumption is, look, both, one is, it's just we're out of compliance, so it doesn't matter. Okay.
I know that what Kevin Kachansky normally does, he does a blending thing. If a
Right.
certain percentage of your property is R1, then you get that percentage for R1. If it's PB, you get that percentage for PB. Probably in this instance, the R1 percentage I know is less. It's probably only 20 or 22%, whereas the PB maybe 40%. But I still think even with that blending, we would need relief on the impervious coverage.
Okay.
Even though we may not need relief if you're just looking at the R1 district, because doesn't appear as if there's really much in the R1 except for that paving for the parking.
Thank you, Nick. All right. I'm going to, as we sometimes do, just open it up to the board for comments or perspectives prior to inviting a motion. So we've had some detailed testimony, significant testimony, a variety of questions. Does anybody want to share perspectives for consideration by their fellow board members? You all certainly had a lot of questions the last hour.
Yeah, my question, I think it may also be something that Brad has given some thought to as well, is whether there aren't other locations either on the property for the same sized generator or splitting the generating requirement into more than one location. There, from my looking at the plans and sorry, excuse me, if for instance you take a look at A6, that certainly looks like the photograph was taken during the business time, and there are certainly some locations that might they may be further away from the building. I understand that that would be an issue that would have to be dealt with in one fashion or another. But, to the extent the testimony is, we really didn't look around for other spots or alternatives, and I may be misstating the testimony a little bit, but that's my impression of the testimony that we've received this evening. When we do grant relief, we are mindful of granting the minimum relief necessary to alleviate the unnecessary hardship. These are commercial issues that we're talking about. These are not. There's a huge heritage tree in my backyard, and I need to put the addition to my house somewhere else. I mean, these are all commercial issues, and the problem I'm having with the request for relief is that I'm not sure that a full consideration of alternatives has been undertaken. Yeah, that's certainly a convenient spot for that generator. But it's in a residential zoned district. That ring of residential didn't just fall out of the sky. It was implemented for a reason. And I think we have to be mindful of the legislative intent that created that ring of residential area and what that was intended to do. So at this point, I'm certainly willing to listen to everybody else, but at this point, I'm having difficulty getting to yes on this application.
Other perspectives?
I am 100% with John. I mean, I'm struggling with, again, I think the characterization that other locations were not looked at extensively, other options, at least pricing out, full battery backup. You know, I'm also mindful that you are going to be taking out the buffer strip here. I'm actually looking at the drawings. You're at least taking out two almost 20-inch spruces, and maybe a 24-inch, which is also not good for the environment. You know, and I personally I worked outside of an office where our generator was 12 feet away, and it didn't impact me at all. So, I mean, I don't see a reason why at least there should be some work done to say there are not alternative locations, or the alternative solutions are exorbitant price, you know, or installation or whatever. So I'm also struggling with, you know, we're definitely, I don't feel like we're granting the minimum relief necessary. And to be perfectly honest, I'm also, I think, a little bit also with Nick saying you might also get this by right. But if I'm confronted with a variance, that's what I'm thinking. I think you have some good arguments on the accessory use. And if I saw the calculation for R1, maybe that would be a different argument. Maybe you don't have an impervious issue if you got 22%. But if a variance is in front of me, I'm struggling with it.
I'm going to jump in, and if not, provide an opposite perspective, provide a different perspective, which is my main concern is not so much the particular impact on the residential strip as, for want of a better word, the precedent and impinging upon the policy that was established by the residential strip. That being said, it seems to me that the application as designed has taken not only reasonable but perhaps unusually vigilant steps to minimize the impact on neighbors based upon the sound attenuation evidence, and also based upon the location, the topography, the hill. You know, I'm struggling with balancing some of our obligations here as against reasonable accommodation for pretty significant taxpayer and location in the township, sort of seeking an accommodation which is not an extraordinary, from my perspective, is not an extraordinary one, and which would have some impact on neighboring property owners, but I think relatively modest impact upon the neighboring property owners, given the distances that are involved. A couple things that came up during the questioning were ideas relating to conditioning the approval on decommissioning of the existing tenant generators, and also providing some framework for the times within which monthly testing would occur. And I think with those kinds of limitations, I would probably be sympathetic to the request for relief. The others can either share or wait until we get something on the board. And I mean, well,
First of all, I've been very impressed with the caliber of the team that's been assembled here to put this together. And it seems to me like the plan that you have is certainly a workable one for the property, and it's been successful, and it's been wonderful for the community. And I'm just, trying to put myself somewhat in the shoes of the people in the community and thinking that, could this plan, if this group had worked ever to incorporate their needs into the thinking that went into this, could you have come up with a plan that would have worked well for everyone rather than coming here? They say this is the first time they've heard it. I assume it is. A lot of the things that we've heard from you have been really verbal, that we really haven't seen the kinds of work product that you produce to give them. And it also seems to me like maybe your thinking was specifically aimed to do this one project as opposed to looking at a broader thing. So I'm open in a sense to approving this because I do think it's important and I think it's a wonderful thing to be doing, but I would feel a lot more comfortable if the process had been stronger and that this group had worked more openly and also with the neighbors. So that's kind of where I am at it.
And I'm also having a bit of difficulty, like Brad and John communicated. I would have liked to have seen more exploration and an explanation of why multiple generators would not be a practical solution cost-wise. At the same time, Bill's comments about this being, an important taxpayer to the community are very significant. And as a practical, pro-business matter, I am sympathetic to this particular property as being important to the township. Ultimately, while I do sympathize business-wise, I don't know that it's necessary to have the one generator for the landlord to be giving its tenants what it wants for backup power. That's just not clear on the record to me. So ultimately, I would have to be a no.
having heard from folks, I'll welcome a motion. We can sit here all night.
Yeah, no problem. I'll make a motion to deny the request for a variance for the impervious and the, what was the other one? The use, accessory use.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, let's, I'm not sure I'm going to convince anybody, but again, I struggle with us micromanaging an application like this. I think that, in a perfect world, some of these questions regarding the Tesla batteries, et cetera, may have been anticipated and answered. But I'll come back to my opinion, which is I think that this landlord did not make this proposal willy-nilly. I think they gave it a good bit of thought and did come up with a pretty significantly, I thought, impressive team to develop an approach which would minimize impact on neighbors and minimize impact on the township. And that's the reason that I would intend to vote no on the motion. Open to more discussion.
Yeah, and I don't want my opposition to this application to be seen as any criticism of the efforts to which the property owner has gone to assemble the application and the thought that has been given to implementation of the preferred location for this generator. But again, I don't know that the property owner has gone to the extent that it could to further mitigate the effect of this generator on neighboring property owners. And the siting of the generator in the R1, I understand that parking is already in the R1. Parking tends to be fairly quiet. And, you know, once a sizable encroachment of a substantial generator is put into the R1, I think both in kind and extent, that's a materially different incursion into the R1 buffer than the current situation with parking. So please don't, you know, I do not want to be seen as you know, saying that you just threw the idea against the wall to see if it would stick. You've obviously gone to great lengths to put together a thought-out proposal. But I would encourage the property owner to put some thought to where else on the property this generator or a number of different generators might be placed, because I think more can be done to lessen the impact. And one of the considerations that we are asked to consider when granting a variance is the impact on neighboring property owners. And in this case, I believe that the impact is such that more thought, I think, I really feel should be given to where on this property that effect can be mitigated.
John, I'm going to make a suggestion which I'll only follow through with if the majority of the board were to agree. One option is to allow the applicant the opportunity to ask for the matter to be continued to potentially present more evidence on the limited question of attempting to demonstrate that this is the best and most appropriate option for providing this additional capacity.
And I guess my question would be, why wouldn't they have done that this evening?
Okay, so we know what John's opinion is. And unless not.
I am fine with that. I mean, again, as long as the applicant understands. We need to, it's not that we're against this, but we haven't heard testimony that this is the minimum relief necessary. And
Yeah,
I would like to know from the architect or someone else that says, we looked at the roof, we looked at splitting, we looked at all these things, and it just wouldn't work, and this is why.
It's really minimum relief and impact on the neighbors.
And I'm definitely open to allowing that. I mean, personally, I want this generator to be put there. I mean, it's just a matter of my gut desires. It's what I want. It's just that this wasn't the minimum relief necessary. So if there were more, more information put forward, I'd be definitely willing.
The applicant can either indicate that it would ask the board to proceed to a final determination, or if the applicant is interested in seeking a continuance for the limited purpose of providing evidence just on the issue of this location as opposed to options, including all the options have been raised, with attention to how those options would impact neighbors.
We can, I would request continuance for that, because there's a lot of issues that were presented here tonight.
Right.
That, you know, just like any case, there's no discovery here, and we can't anticipate the questions. And a lot of the questions we hadn't even discussed as a team that came up tonight.
Okay,
So
and
I would request a continuance.
Nick, you'll presumably agree to extension of all the applicable statutory deadlines?
And we have to pay a fee, and we have to pay a $200 fee. I'll send a letter to John. extending the time to render a decision, extending the time to hear the case as well.
Well, it's
Although
actually,
already
you
started.
can say it on the record, there's no need for.
Yeah, okay.
But just, you'll extend the time to start the hearing again until the September meeting.
Yeah, it'll be the
and then
September
45
meeting.
days after the conclusion of hearings.
Right, and 45 days after
Okay.
that, and I realize we're obligated to pay the fee as well.
Well, it's actually, 40, if for some reason we actually continue at like the 45 days from the last hearing, hopefully, we won't have to hear this.
Yeah, actually,
again.
you've already started the hearing, so I don't think
Yeah,
that
okay, that's-
requirement is really applicable here, since you
Okay.
already started the hearing, and I'm requesting
And
continuance.
we will grant that request for continuance to the folks who are here. I want to thank you for coming in. Your testimony was helpful to us. We've taken it seriously, and you're certainly welcome to come back when we do this in September. And if you either want to confirm your perspective, add additional perspectives, and as all you deem appropriate, you may want to interact with one another between now and the September hearing.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just would like to put out there, for whatever it's worth, the condition, if the proposal should emerge that they would condition the grant of relief on the removal of the generators, I think they need to provide evidence that the tenants will abandon that. And one of the, there are other leasing issues, like, is there a confidentiality provision in the lease that they can't get, they have to get permission to do? Are there any tenant mortgagees? I mean, just be aware of that, because, just saying right off the tip of the tongue that we can tell the tenant to stop doing it may not be possible.
I'll say what I said before. This is the landlord's issue, because if we impose that condition, they have to work around the condition. I think they're smart enough people to figure out, they'll socialize that question and deal with it between now and September. But if they want to share with us evidence that they have the authority, fine. If they don't, I still think we can impose the condition, and the condition will be effective with its imposition. If they can't get the waivers of the tenants' rights, that'll be their problem, not ours.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's correct.
With that, I will bring this hearing to a close. Meeting adjourned.